All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. We're here today to talk about broadband in Susquehanna County. So before we start today, why don't we just go around the table and introduce ourselves and tell everybody where you're from.
My name is Ryan Garrison. I'm a technology design consultant and the director of technology at Hunt Engineering.
Chris Brown, the Economic Development Specialist for the Progress Authority.
And of course, I'm Commissioner Alan Hall.
Marianne Warren, Commissioner.
Stacy Wilson, Susquehanna County Independent.
So we're here today to talk a little bit about broadband because there's been a lot of controversy about broadband. We hear everything from people are burying wires in the ground to that everybody's going to get broadband at their house and everybody's going to have high-speed internet. So I guess the first thing should start out with, why don't we talk a little bit about where we're at today, what kind of services. I think we can all agree Susquehanna County has the worst service probably in the state of Pennsylvania. So Chris or Ryan, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the broadband landscape today is set with some pretty low standards. Let's put it that way. So when you see about the state putting money towards broadband and these different programs, they're all going for a threshold of what's called 10 megabytes download, 1 megabyte upload. That's basically some metrics of broadband speed at your home. And with those metrics right now, that's very low. And the minute you get 2 or 3 users on a home router through a connection like that, especially when it varies throughout the day, like some technologies can do, you get a lot less than that, right? So that's really the problem today, is that the definition of broadband is a very low one. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at served versus unserved, and it goes to say even more about what you said about Susquehanna County. If you see yourself as unserved, and that's even to those metrics, there's a lot of unserved areas in your county. That's even with a very low standard.
What's very disturbing is that is a low standard by most standards. What we're actually getting at our homes through DSL service is far less than that. There's homes that aren't getting 1.5 megabytes download. So their connectivity to the outside world is seriously inhibited because of the infrastructure that's there.
You know, and just to take one step back, what is broadband?
Good point.
Specifically. Yeah. So broadband is internet access, and that can be a different thing to a different type of customer, right? If residential versus business versus government, right? But at the residential level, it's internet access. And most of over time, telephone lines were run to everyone's house. So that became the first method of delivering bandwidth to people.
But when they ran telephone lines to everybody's house, wasn't that done with federal funding when they first came out with that?
Yes, there was actually I forgot what the actual act was called. But yeah, I think it was in the 20s or teens of the early century, 19th century. And they put lines out to everybody's house. There was power. There was also an act where they actually ran the infrastructure out there. And there has never been a comprehensive look at broadband in that same way. Okay. Because the phone lines. Because that was the early method of delivering broadband to people's homes. It's an extremely limited technology, so that's what's driving these low standards. Right. You know, in my opinion, the low standards are to protect those people with telephone lines to people's houses and that level of service they can provide, because they really can't go above that. So I think that's why that standard got put there, is to protect areas from funding from other service providers.
Is there a standard for broadband? Is there a minimum amount of service you have to have it called broadband?
Yes, and the FCC puts that at the 10 megabytes per second download, 1 or 3 megabytes per second upload. Right. Okay. They vary it that way because as a consumer of broadband, as a resident, you consume more of the downloads. You're always downloading pages, you're downloading content off the internet, you're very infrequently uploading.
So how does it affect, so if you've got a household in, say, many households in a small town, and they have internet access, but you get, let's say you get a bunch of teenagers that are doing gaming, and they're doing online communicating with each other, how does that affect their service?
The more users you put on a home network, they're just going to chew up. Bandwidth is much like water, and a water main, and you have to size that appropriately or you're going to run out of capacity. And it's the same thing going into a home. And when you get more teenagers on doing these different activities, or adults now, I mean, the
True.
Facebook and everything, that taxes that home's internet connection, and that's where you see these drops. And not only that, it adds up all the way down the line with certain technologies like copper plant and cable plant. All the way down the line, people struggle. That's why you see those downtimes around 4 when people are starting to get home. Everybody's consuming the bandwidth. So all the way down the line, that water main is getting used up.
So, I think we've got to the point where we understand that our service is pretty poor, and how we got here. So let's talk a little bit about where we're at today and what we're working on today.
Basically, what the county is doing is they've put out an RFP for a study to be done to actually do a middle mile project. What a middle mile project is the infrastructure that is going to be used as the backbone for getting the internet to the rural parts of the county. Basically, as it stands right now, if a company in Montrose wants to get to New Milford, they have to build all of the miles of fiber, infrastructure to New Milford to do that. What the type of a network that we're actually proposing is that backbone will already be there. They could hop off the network in Montrose, hop on the network in New Milford, branch out and do New Milford, and not have to build that middle mile in between. So what this type of a network is going to do for Susquehanna County is even level the even playing field, because everybody will have access to this. Every internet service provider will have an access point to be able to tap into this network. So it's not, right now there is a lot of fiber that is being strung throughout the county. It's sole sourced fiber, and it's run by the company that is actually running it. So if a competitor wants to connect to that, they don't have to let them. They're not, or they're going to price it at a point where they can't be competitive. So we're limited to the capacity of what is available in the county right now. So this is, besides leveling the playing field, it's also going to bring in hopefully some competition. It's going to be able to look at areas where right now the biggest argument for that a for-profit company, telecommunication company, is saying for not actually developing an area is there's too many people and there's too few people and too many miles of road. So building this middle mile will take care of that for them, and they'll actually be able to look at communities with much smaller populations and still get the return on investment that they need.
Do you have, so what you're saying is we're looking at building this middle mile, which will be probably a private-public partnership, and then it'll allow the end companies that provide internet service to your house to hook to that and bring the service to your house.
Correct.
And how much of the county do you think will be covered with that?
So we haven't done any design yet, but the idea is to do it in a complete redundant fashion. So the ring itself will put any service provider within so many miles of every end user, which is pretty close. Like I can't give you the exact mileage we were from everybody in Bradford, but it's a general loop around the county, and with that the service providers are within proximity to the households.
And what this study is going to do is give what the most likely route that needs to take with existing pole infrastructure and existing providers and existing things that are already there, and it can be planned, because another opportunity for this is 911 communication. So any of the communication towers we want to make sure are have fiber to the communication tower, and in the other landmarks, even county-owned buildings, we want to make sure there are strategic places that we want internet, fiber internet to.
So let me touch on that for a minute. So the service providers have this need for a middle mile of fiber and to get close enough to the residents where their costs are decreased to the point where they can build out into certain areas. That's one need. But to mitigate the risk from the county's perspective, part of the dark fiber network is to incorporate these other needs that the county has. There is not a better communication method for 911 or emergency communications than fiber, whether it's radio, cellular technologies. All of that is dependent on fiber. Well, they do it over microwave now, but fiber is a rock solid more reliable technology. So that checks one box. You build this, you've shored up your emergency communications through all your towers throughout the county. Second thing is medical, right? So what medical facilities do you have in the county? They have needs to connect their buildings together for big data. They have x-rays they need to send to different facilities and get this data to people. So that's checkbox number 2. And they'll actually lease, they'll fall under a lease. So you'll actually get money, revenue share back from them, right? Then there's, what am I missing? There's educational facilities, right? A school district wants to connect all their buildings together with with fiber that they own. And then they want to buy one internet connections instead of an internet connection at each building, because that, can quadruple their cost if they have 4 buildings, right? So there's another checkbox. Electrical utilities, gas utilities, these substations. We're going to try to get as close as we can so that we can go in and talk to the Claveracts of the world. I'm not sure who the gas companies are down here. But we want to go in and we want to talk to them and say, hey, look, this is what we have. And we know you need connectivity between these substations for communications. What can we do? We've actually had some discussions with Claverack in Bradford County about their use of that network over there. So, you've got all these needs, and this middle mile can facilitate all of those things, and also complement the internet service providers and make it attractive for them to come into the area.
So where are we at right now with this study and moving forward with this project?
So we're ready to kick off the project and get going on it.
The bid was opened at I think 3 weeks ago, and the bid was awarded to Hunt Engineering. There were 3 bids that came in, and Hunt was the low bidder, but also the one that provided the plan. Ultimately, what this study is going to give us is a plan that we can implement and actually prioritize where we want to do this. So some of the other bid respondents kind of gave like a general broad brush that this is available here, but not an actual plan to implement. The one from Hunt Engineering gives us an implementable plan, so we're pretty excited for them to get started. The time period that it's going to take, because there's going to be a significant amount of survey of poles. There's going to be a significant amount of time in actually planning this route out. So the approximate.
And it's a good segue into another piece of the proposal was the actual survey of the poles, and that's where we feel like we got this thing right in Bradford County. It's very hard to plan an outside plant project where you're on telephone poles without having a really good idea of how much it's going to cost for you to get on those poles.
So we're not burying it then, because one of the fallacies or one of the statements out there is that we're burying fiber throughout the county.
That could happen. There could be situations where the pole, they're not going to be accessible, and we may not have to connect locations, and we may have to dig in certain areas and bury fiber.
But for the most part, it's going to be on poles.
Yes, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Digging is very expensive, obviously, but then also repairs and to actually get to the cable, it's like a trade-off. Sometimes your cable's more protected underground, yet it's harder to get to it if something goes wrong.
So unless it's in a tunnel where you can get to and work on it,
That's right.
it poses other huge cost factors to it.
And the cost factors of getting on the pole may force us to do that in some situations, because for them to go let us in what they call the communication space, they may have to do power work that costs a lot of money, and you add that up over the whole course of the project, and it can be prohibitive. So that's why we want to go out there and actually take pictures of the poles, do measurements, so that we have a very good idea of what make ready is going to be incurred if you guys move forward with the project, because to carry a contingency for that unknown amount is hard to do and make the project feasible. So you want to get a real good idea of what that is, design around the challenges, and get that project cost down to where it's palatable.
So how long do you think it'll take to put a plan together?
I think 6 months is probably a safe bet to get you guys
Right.
The first draft of that report, and then I think there's a little bit of a process of speaking with the county and going through the
Right.
fine details of it, and then
Right.
we would present to your,
I think one of the things that, we as the commissioners are kind of feel we're in a good place on is you've already done this project in Bradford County.
Yep.
So you've learned by all the hiccups in the road and the
Yes.
things that can go wrong.
Yep.
So, we're pretty much hoping that we'll have a smoother flow. But how did you make out Bradford County? Where are you at in that process?
I'll let Chris speak to when we're going to start and how the funding's going, but we've completed all the survey. We've worked with Penelec to get all the permitting done. So we're all permitted, we're all ready to go for construction. We have a final construction estimate and we're waiting on some funding to be approved. And as soon as that goes, we have the green light from the utility to build the actual project.
The system over there is broken up into 3 loops. So the first loop is actually fully funded. So we're ready to start construction on that first loop within, I'd say, 2 weeks. The other funding that we sought was USDA funding for loops 2 and 3. We haven't heard anything back on those applications yet, so those ones are pending. We wanted to build the first loop also to get it in the air and proof is in the pudding, to prove to the internet service providers that this is viable and this is going to work. So loop 1, we're considering probably the 12-month is the deadline as far as building it, but in all likelihood it would be much sooner than that, and that's 88 miles in the first loop.
Honestly, the construction goes quicker than the design and planning process unfortunately with these asset
Right.
plant projects.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you talked about the first loop and that's fully funded, are you looking at any federal funds or state funds to assist in this?
Most of the funding that we looked at on the federal level is through USDA. There's a Reconnect program that was put out. However, most of the federal funding, the unfortunate side of federal funding is they want to fund last mile providers. They actually want to fund, they set the minimum limits, like Ryan had said, of 10 megabytes down, 3 megabytes up. And they want to funnel those funds to those end providers to improve the service there. The problem is there's nothing left for the middle mile projects. And so we were able to meet with legislators to explain that. There was a small piece of the Reconnect program. I think there was $600 million that was available through the Farm Bill nationally, and only $10 million of it was available for middle mile. So as they do revisions in the future, they're hopefully going to hear that those types of projects need to be done as well, the middle mile projects. The state funding has been, we have applied for RACP, which is the governor's budget, and we have been included in legislation, and the application process, whenever the governor opens that up, we stand a pretty decent chance. Most of the people at the state level have been familiar with what we've done in Bradford County, and they're familiar with that type of a project. So it's a nice way to actually lead in to an application for Susquehanna County.
I thought there was some funding set aside by the governor for broadband service.
There was some funding that was set aside for people who had CAF2 funding. So the companies that had applied for and received CAF2 funding would also get additional money from the state. The CAF2 funding actually is extremely difficult to get, and it requires quite a few hoops to jump through to get that. We've not applied for that. There's too many restrictions, and it requires too many services to be provided on the network that we weren't interested in. It would have made it not cost effective.
So when we talk about this middle mile, who's the owner of the middle mile?
The county needs to decide what to do with that asset, because it truly is an asset.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, just as an example, we've seen some networks up in New York State that are dark fiber networks, middle mile networks, be sold for millions of dollars post construction and use for 15 years. So that asset can really kind of hold its value.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the decisions we had to make in Bradford County was, okay, who's going to realize the value of this asset? Because all this federal funding that we're talking about right now essentially becomes equity for these internet service providers eventually. So thinking of it that way and taxpayer money, part of the idea there was we're gonna find a way to control this, and this is gonna be an asset for the county, and we wanna make sure that it's fair and equal for everybody, and this is how we're gonna do that.
So let me ask this question. So in Susquehanna County, let's say I live out in the country, and we have a lot of country here, and I'm on a dirt road, and I'm quite a ways out, and I'm at a location I don't even get cable television. I have my phone and I have my electric, and that's it. So am I going to be able to see broadband at my house? I mean, are we saying that every person in this county is going to be able to get it, or are we saying, listen, there are still going to be some areas that are going to be touch and go?
Remember what Ryan said at the beginning as far as what is broadband and what is considered broadband. If everybody's assuming that it's going to be fiber to the home, no. That it is not feasible with the population of Susquehanna County to get fiber to the home of every single one of the residences. However, if you want broadband access, there are other ways to get broadband access. And there's Wi-Fi. You can actually have wireless internet at your home. As long as that technology is fed by fiber, it's very robust, and it will give you those minimum speeds, that 10 megabit. Actually, what's the capacity on Wi-Fi?
Wireless can go up to 100 meg, if you get a really expensive one, but not a lot of guys do that.
Right.
Yeah, so, one thing I'd say is that there's no way to guarantee every single person gets it unless the county takes that on as an initiative, and here in Pennsylvania it's a problem. The law prohibits the county or public funds from delivering service. It's probably a lobbying thing.
Right.
So anyways, since you can't guarantee that, you can just do the best that you can to get service there. So if you're that guy on the country dirt road that doesn't even have cable right now, you probably qualify for the USDA Reconnect funding. That's funding for an internet service provider to deliver you bandwidth. I mean, that's a requirement of it. Now this dark fiber middle mile network has put that ISP within 2 miles of this end user as opposed to 10 miles of the end user. So, and that's what you find with a lot of these fundings is it's just not worth it by the sheer distance they have to go to get to some of these people. So if you can get within a certain number of miles of every resident, that's a huge asset for the county to proactively go out to internet service providers and say, look what we have. We connect to these different networks that you connect to. Are you willing to come down and get these census blocks? Because there's funding available for them, and we're within 2 miles.
So two more things. One of the things you touched on just a second ago, and one of the fallacies too is I hear people say, well, county needs to run internet to my house. And as you said, county governments are restricted under the codes. We can't provide services to your house. Mm-hmm. So, I just wanted to make sure that, we talked about that. And, as far as, other sources of internet, another one that I see signs popping up all over the place is, satellite internet. Mm-hmm. So what's your take on the satellite internet?
So satellite internet right now comes from a high orbit. So these satellites are what's considered a high orbit, and because of that, there's high latency. The bandwidth they claim is 24 megabytes per second download, 3 megabytes per second upload. I think that varies, and because of the latency of the high orbit, which is interruptions in packets is probably the simplest way to put it. Video is very hard to stream, for example, right? So those technologies are extremely limited. There's some newer low orbit stuff coming out, but I think that's years and years off. And even then, you need to get all that internet traffic back down to the earth.
Right.
So you're going to run into a small pipe somewhere, and there's going to be a bottleneck. So in my opinion, that's the issue with satellite. And the other issue with satellite is they came in New York State specifically, they took state broadband funding to go in and take certain census blocks, and now they're available for no one. So at this point, satellite's taking that dibs on those census blocks, and no one else is going to get any funding from anybody, including the federal government, because they all talk to each other and make sure that there isn't a project going on. And so now you have this situation where satellite's called dibs on it, and that's all that's going to be there. Broadband is one of those things where Unfortunately, to get any kind of completeness, it's got to be some kind of act put forward, like rural electrification or the Telephone Act. There's got to be something done like that, because otherwise it's just not, there's no motivation in these different companies called dibs on areas, and there's not a lot of overbuilding.
So, but what you're seeing in funding, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you said that you're seeing in federal funding and is that that's more for the end supplier.
That's right.
Not for the middle mile.
That's right.
Trying to improve what we already have and not really trying to get more services.
That's right.
Okay. One of the other things when you talk about the satellite that I think it's interesting too, because a lot of people that we have in the area talk about how slow their internet speed is, and they go to pay a bill online and it times out before they can pay it. One of the other things I do know with satellite, when you're using some type of satellite program, even when you're using a satellite phone, there's a delay. And of course that'll cause you some issues too.
And that's the latency
Yeah.
that we've been talking about. When we talk about technologies as far as bandwidth, there's copper, so that's phone lines and cable television. That's how Frontier and Spectrum do their cable plant. Then there's satellite, but the king of everything is fiber. Fiber is limitless. It's been limitless since it was invented, because the technology revolves around the electronics on either end of it. So the cable stays the same. And what you're seeing with a good fiber optic cable plant that delivers internet is the very minimum you're going to do is 100 megabytes per second download. So that's tenfold what the national standard is. And in most cases where they've run it to the homes, they're talking about 300, 400, 500 meg and a gig service. So that's it's far superior to what's out there now. So really, I think what you're seeing in the current broadband landscape is a lot of old technology being held on to, and there's nothing they can do about it. For a copper provider to go back and replace all their plant with fiber, it's never going to happen. So I think that's where we're at. I think there's a limit to what can happen with what's currently there, and there's not much that's going to happen until someone else like yourself comes in and does something.
Right. Stacy, you got any questions or comments?
We've touched upon several of the things that I've been following through the past 2-3 years that we've been talking seriously about broadband in the county. But I know, and I went back and I reviewed some of like the previous stories and other items. And if we can talk a little, and I know we don't have a healthcare provider in the room, but they have federal mandates that they have to meet for telehealth. And I know, Chris, you've spoke on that before, and wondered if you could kind of speak a little bit to telehealth and what that does to our critical access hospitals that we have in this county. So,
When you're in a rural county, access to healthcare is one of the most difficult things. We're very fortunate in Susquehanna County to have 2 critical access hospitals. We're very fortunate to have them. However, through the use of this technology, the distance between yourself and those hospitals could be mitigated. The telehealth that is required from the federal guidelines, the current infrastructure that's out there, they're not going to be able to do it. They're not going to be able to get to the homes to actually provide this telehealth service, because it's a video upload and it's a video download. So the bandwidth requirement for that type of service is huge. So under the current existing structures, it would be very difficult for them to get their whole target market to be able to do it. But besides telehealth, there are electronic records. The data that a hospital uses to transmit that data is darn near impossible on DSL because of the amount of data that it needs to be transferred. So healthcare stands a vast improvement through improving the bandwidth, the broadband access and infrastructure throughout the county.
So, if I'm hearing this right, if we don't take and provide this middle mile and get this broadband and get the pipe big enough for these hospitals, with this new telemedicine, is it possible that they could lose their critical care status or lose services because they don't have enough speed?
Well, that I can't speak to, but I can speak to some specific examples in the Guthrie healthcare system about them having to transfer these X-rays to other. Sometimes they start at one facility if a customer comes in or a patient comes in, and they have to transfer them somewhere else with the expertise. To get that information to these different places. I know that's a big concern for them, but I can't speak to accreditations and whatever metrics that they have to meet.
It would, like the critical access funding itself, I think they do set certain benchmarks and they are changing over time, but exactly where those benchmarks are, I'm not aware.
I can tell you that they do host a lot of services right at the medical facilities that they probably don't need to because of that, right? If their problem is getting stuff from A to B, they just keep it all at A, and then when they really need to just transfer stuff over, they do that.
Okay.
And then because we are an agricultural community, the PA Grange, as a statewide Grange, has really taken up broadband as a major issue this year. Can you speak a little to how access to broadband is important to our modern farms and farmers?
Absolutely. I mean, everything that the modern farm, I think a lot of farmers are held back by the lack of broadband. The type of equipment that they have out there that's connected to GPS, but then also Wi-Fi within their farm, and getting that data back to them is critical. Whether it's weather data, there's other types of, I can't speak specifically what these sensors do, but they put sensors right out in the field. And that gives them all kinds of feedback and data points.
Moisture content.
Exactly. So, and a lot of those things run on cellular, so I think in rural communities they've kind of gone back to that technology because that's all they get a lot of times. They get a little bit of signal from a cell phone tower way out, but boy, if they had that right on site, that would be a much better for them. So yes, it's huge in the agriculture industry, and specifically with Reconnect grant from the USDA, you got extra points by hooking up farms. So if you could show that you were hooking up to farms, that was, so nationally they recognize that.
Okay.
All right, and I had one more, if I could find it, but talk a little to basic residential use. I mean, you talked about users on the line and decreasing bandwidth and the issues with that, but there's also a number of people who have gone wireless and even incurred extra cost in their homes simply because they can get a Wi-Fi signal as opposed to paying for or they can get a data signal from a cellular carrier versus getting any service from a hardline provider, like the traditional providers in the area.
So you're talking like hotspots and...
Yeah, I know a number of people who have completely gone away from the traditional phone company, cable companies, because they can't get service in their home, like enough to do regular everyday activities. And so if you could talk a little bit, again, like reiterate a little bit about the loops and where you intend to position the loops to, I mean, I know you don't have the exact locations yet, but the broad sense of the loops and what that will do just for our everyday users.
Yep. So all those check boxes we talked about earlier about mitigating risk and taking care of county needs and healthcare needs and educational needs, what you'll find is that these entities are positioned very strategically around your county, and you can come up with a very complete picture of what the loop's going to look like by where these facilities are positioned and knowing that you have to be within proximity of those, including cell phone towers. So with all these things mapped out, we select this route that'll essentially look like a loop but just for redundancy's sake. So it'll just be, so we'll use all those elements to capture that route and to make sure that we're in proximity to things. To speak to your hotspot Verizon point, some of the downfalls with that are capped data, and also the landscape's changing. 5G is coming, and 5G, the real story with 5G is that the antennas have much less range, right? So where you could put up one cell phone tower, up on a hill, now it's got to be a bunch of little access points throughout a town. So how does that affect rural America? Well, it means you're probably never going to get it unless you have fiber to your home and Verizon gives you your device, and now that's a change in business plan for them. So I can't say that that's the way they're going to go, but that's the reality of 5G technology. So as they move to that, I wonder what they're going to do with the rural areas. They'll probably keep it on similar technology as they do now, but I think that's going to limit people as well. So I think that's part of the issue with running off the hotspot. I know I hit data caps when I'm at,
Right, and they're hitting their data caps.
Yeah.
And then on the educational front, I know a lot of or at least some of the schools use, I believe, internet from the IU and secure their bandwidth that way. But the state is also positioning, like, no snow days and being able to use internet to remotely teach and not lose a day's instruction. Of course, here, we have probably more snow days than they do in the southern part of the state, and yet we have worse access to internet. So it's not really something our districts here that could use it would be able to take advantage of.
The problem is if the school has adequate broadband, that's great. But if the end user doesn't, it's pointless. Because that teacher can be in that classroom teaching away, but if the kid that's home does not have the wireless access or the Wi-Fi access at home or the broadband necessary to actually run the device and interact, it's pointless.
I think the real troubling piece with I work a lot in education as well. And the troubling piece with that is first off, the initiatives like a one-to-one computer to student initiative is very hard for districts to complete because students can't take the devices home. They cannot guarantee that the work that they assign at home can be done at home if the student doesn't have an internet connection. So that's problem number one. The second problem is, if you just think over the course of a day how many things you Google. Someone talks about something you don't know about. And, my world has changed since I've had access to YouTube and Google and these different things. So, if you can imagine one student having that and another student not having that, the divide, they talk about the digital divide. I mean, that's going to be a chasm here sooner or later because of the issues that we have in rural America. So that is the more troubling one to me is that, there's just basic everyday things that certain kids don't have access to that other kids do, and it's just going to create a divide in for
The education,
yeah,
sure.
Exactly.
Sure.
One thing that is very prevalent in parts of the county, there are parts of this county that does have adequate broadband.
Right.
There are locally owned providers that have done a fantastic job within their service area of building that out for their service area. And what this network would do is allow them to hop and be able to do that in other areas and not have to build that middle mile. So it's an equalizer for the existing providers that are here as well. This is not intended to shut them out by any stretch of the imagination. This is to enhance their assets as well.
Right. Very good. Okay. Any other closing comments?
No, that was fun.
That was fun.
All right. Well, listen, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I think we got a lot of good information, and we're going to share it with the public, and hopefully they'll be more informed as to what's going on with broadband in our county. So again, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Good job, everybody.
Cool.
Yeah.